Welcome back to the Political Education for Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Nitra, and today we're calling out the masters of selective memory. You've probably seen or heard Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. They're running to be the Republican nominee to run against the Democratic nominee for president. And we already know who Democratic nominee is. That's Joe Biden. Nothing you can do about it, right? An incumbent president always runs again unless they step down. That's sort of how that whole presidential thing works. And I'm actually going to be doing an episode on that about government. Let's get into it. We're going to talk about some real American history. So Nikki Haley and them on their high horse saying that the U.S. is this utopia that's never been a racist country. That's coming from the party that has spouted nothing but racist remarks and racist policies. She comes from, this is Haley we're talking about, immigrant parents. They immigrated here from, I believe, Punjabi, India. I think that's right. Now she's a candidate for president, running for president. Okay, cool. That sounds all good. Let's not twist her personal success into a whitewashed narrative of America's racial past. It's like she lives in a fantasy land where systemic racism is a Michael Myers movie. Lady, it exists. It is real. Okay? Like there's no, she actually said it herself. Let's listen to what she said.
No, we're not a racist country, Brian. We've never been a racist country. Our goal is to make sure that today is better than yesterday. Are we perfect? No. But our goal is to always make sure we try and be more perfect every day that we can. I know I faced racism when I was growing up, but I can tell you today is a lot better than it was then.
You agree that the U.S. has never been a racist country?
Well, the U.S. Is not a racist country, and we've overcome things in our history. We've had challenges with how race was viewed. It doesn't matter your background. This is the best place to grow up and to pursue your dreams of any place in the entire world.
So that was Nikki Haley. Nimrata is her real name. Nimrata. Haley is her married name, actually. So that was her in the first clip. The second clip was Ron DeSantis. And she said that a few days ago. And then they had a town hall. And at the town hall said this.
You about a comment you made earlier this week. You said that America has, quote, never been a racist country, unquote. Protections for the institution of slavery were written into the U.S. Constitution. The White House was built with slave labor. Your home state of South Carolina seceded from the Union, fought a war to defend the enslavement of black people. I understand you don't think America is a racist country now, but we're here at a college. Do you really think as a historical matter, America has never been a racist country?
Think about what you're saying. First of all, I will tell you, when you look at, the Declaration of Independence, it was that, men are created equal with unalienable rights, right? That was what we all knew. But what I look at it as is I was a brown girl that grew up in a small rural town. We had plenty of racism that we had to deal with. But my parents never said we lived in a racist country. And I'm so thankful they didn't. Because for every brown and black child out there, if you tell them they live or born in a racist country, you're immediately telling them they don't have a chance. And my parents would always say, you may have challenges. And yes, there will be people who are racist, but that doesn't define what you can do in this country. And so I think it's important that we tell all kids that, look, America is not perfect. We have our stains. We know that. But our goal should always be to make today better than yesterday. It's hugely important. And that's the problem I have is we have too many people with this national self-loathing. It is killing our country. We have got to go back to loving America. We are blessed because that little brown girl in that small rural town in South Carolina, she grew up to become the first female minority governor in history. She then went on to be UN ambassador, and now she's running for president of the United States. I want every brown and black child to see that and say, no, I don't live in a country that was formed on racism. I live in a country where they wanted all people to be equal and to make sure that they had life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay, but just to push back a bit, because I was a history major in New Hampshire. You're talking about the ideals of America. But America was founded institutionally on many racist precepts, including slavery.
But when you look, it said all men are created equal. I think the intent was to do the right thing. Now, did they have to go fix it along the way? Yes, but I don't think the intent was ever that we were going to be a racist country. The intent was everybody was going to be created equally. And as we went through time, they fixed the things that were not all men are created equal. They made sure women became equal too. All of these things happened over time. But I refuse to believe that the premise of when they formed our country was that it was a racist country to start with. I refuse to believe that. I have to know in my heart and in everybody's heart that we live in the best country in the world, and we are a work in progress, and we've got a long way to go to fix all of our little kinks. But I truly believe our founding fathers had the best of intentions when they started, and we fixed it along the way, and we should always look at it that way.
So none of it was on the surface factual. So the irony here is that her own story is racist, not just her specifically, because in the first clip she said that she dealt with racism. But let's not just gloss over the fact that she's witnessed racism. It's not just she witnessed racism. Her parents were victims of racism and racist policies even when immigrating here. So the reason that she was able to immigrate to this country was because of course, or her parents was because of the civil rights movements. Those legislation came out of those movements, right? So her parents had to come here. Her parents isn't of the same hue as she, right? So they're more of the darker Indian hue, and she's more of a whiter hue. But her parents migrated over here, right? Her father could not get a job because of racism, so he went to teach at a HBCU. Her mother was a seamstress or a designer or something of that sort. I can't think exactly what it was. Her mom made dresses or hats or some shit. White people would not purchase from her mom. So, one, they moved to a black community, predominantly black community. Predominantly black people is who her mom sold her products to, meaning her clothing, whatever she designed or whatever. I don't know if she was a storekeeper or whatever. She's saying that America is not a racist country, yet her entire being is based on racism, even after she immigrated, or her parents immigrated from another country to this one. So she's not saying what she knows her supporters would cringe at hearing. That's the sort of the trend now. So racist people don't want to be called racist, but they want to be racist. They just don't want to be called racist. You know, that whole call a thing a thing? They don't want to be called a thing, but they still want to be that thing. So there's actually legislation in, I want to say, Florida, that was introduced in Florida, where a member of the Florida State House is proposing legislation to stop people from calling other people racist. Yeah, they're trying to enact a law, and they tout freedom of speech, right? But apparently not when you make the racists feel bad. They want to accept that this country has slavery, and it was built on slavery, and its whole premise and principles were built on slavery and race. Yet they don't want to say it. So they'll embrace that, yes, we did have race-based slaves, right? Because it was a institution of race-based slavery. White people were not slaves. Most times they would consider them indentured servants, and after they got rid of the term indentured servants, they became workers. So if white people were working on a plantation, they were getting paid. They got wages, or they were settling a debt, whatever it is. They were not slaves. They could not be slaves, right? It was written in the laws. The funny part about the GOP, and GOP stands for Grand Old Party, just to be honest, there is people of color who is trying so hard to be a part of this party that don't want them to be a part of it. The GOP does not want black people. They don't want dark people. They don't want immigrants unless you come from a quote unquote white country. So although these people are fighting so hard to keep this pretend world that doesn't exist, they somehow think they're included. They're not. Okay? Here's why. No, I played that clip. Since then, DeSantis has dropped out of the race. I call him White Boots. So he's dropped out the race. Another candidate dropped out the race. That's Vivek. Vivek Swamy. Vivek, okay? Let's just call him Vivek. Vivek dropped out. I want to say he dropped out during the Iowa caucus or right after the Iowa caucus or something like that. Not sure exactly, but Vivek is Indian American, similar to Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley she's an American. She was born here, but she's of Indian descent. Her parents are, I believe Vivek was born here too. I don't really know Vivek, honestly. This guy just kind of came out of nowhere. We know Nikki Haley from South Carolina. Dylan Roof murdered the 6 people during Bible study. Reverend Pinckney was one of them. There are some more names. I can't remember to say them just now, but I'll put them in the show notes. Nikki Haley was the governor at the time. She signed the legislation to remove the Confederate flag from the State House, but she didn't do it just because she wanted to. She actually was in favor of keeping the Confederate flag there. She said it means heritage. So we know who Nikki Haley is, right? There was a lot of protests over the Confederate flag in South Carolina. So this is where we know her from. So she's been placating to her base for some time. She also, I believe she appointed Tim Scott to the Senate seat. She appointed him as senator for South Carolina. That was a few years back. I can't remember exactly. Back to the current race, because we're going to go backwards and just really debunk that whole America has never been a racist country thing. We're going to squash that lie. So Vivek dropped out of the race after the Iowa caucus. A few of the members of the Iowa caucus had something to say about the candidates. And Vivek came up And one of the people said something to the effect of, I won't vote for him because he looks like a terrorist. That's not funny, but that is funny because Vivek has been the biggest anti-black person. No, I won't say the biggest anti-black. He's been the loudest anti-black candidate on the GOP side. I can go through a slew of things of what this dude said. He said racism don't exist, blah, blah, blah. He said a lot of stuff, okay? But he's very much anti-black. They're all kind of taking on this whole anti-blackness just to, I don't know if they believe it or they're just doing it to get seen or to get some type of recognition or whatever. I don't know. But all of them are kind of doing it. So you have Vivek over there. He's just being straight anti-black and racist. And then you have DeSantis, the governor of Florida. This the man who pretty much looks like he's trying to turn book banning by black authors into a sport and throwing away any kind of diversity, equity, inclusion. He's just throwing all that shit out the window. So America isn't racist, but let's ban all of the black authors, right? And then let's get rid of diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Straight out of the segregationist playbook. This is the Southern strategy. It's like he's on a mission to erase the very voice and stories that challenge his non-racist American narrative. Ron DeSantis is also, I believe his descendants are from Cuba, so they would flip on him in a second. They flipped on Vivek. They actually just really don't like DeSantis. Like he'll never be president, but he's one of the more dangerous ones because he's a governor. And so he's enacting policies that backs up the rhetoric. You can espouse racist talking points all day long, and it may have some effect on us. It influence other people to be racist and all of that. But when you have the institution backing it, meaning you have the power to enact the laws to back your racism, well, then that's when it actually affects our lives. That's the whole thing Nikki Haley was completely delusioned about, because you could say that it wasn't a racist country, but it damn sure embraced racism in all its policies and institutions. So because she's saying that this country was never racist, and then she said the intent, their intent was to do this, and this. No, it wasn't. Let's take a blast from the racist past. Let me read you a few racist quotes from America's political leaders and presidents from different eras. I think I can answer that question about America's racism with just a few quotes. John C. Calhoun, he was a supporter of slavery, but this is what he said. I hold that in the present state of civilization, where two races of different origin and distinguished by color and other physical differences as well as intellectual are brought together, the relation now existing in the slaveholding states between the two is, instead of an evil, a good, a positive good. That was John C. Calhoun. He was the vice president. Let's see. Here's another. Andrew Johnson. This was the biggest racist. This was the 17th president of the United States right after the ending of the Civil War and after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. He took over. This is Andrew Johnson. He said, "This is a country for white men, and by God, as long as I am president, it shall be a government for white men." Okay. Here's another one. Thomas Jefferson, 1785. "I advance it, therefore, as a suspicion only that the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to the whites in the endowment both of body and mind." Ronald Reagan said, this was in, I think, 1971. He referred to African delegates to the United States as monkeys who are still uncomfortable wearing shoes. Harry Truman in 1911 said, and this was in a letter he wrote, "I think one man is just as good as another so long as he's honest and decent and not a nigger or a Chinaman." That was in 1911. This is Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, of course. He's the one that signed the Civil Rights Act, the series of Civil Rights Act. He said, "I'll have those niggers voting Democrat for the next 200 years. He also said, "These Negroes, they're getting pretty uppity these days, and that's the problem for us since they've got something now they never had before. The political pull to back up their uppityness. Now we got to do something about this, and we've got to give them a little something, just enough to quiet them down. Not enough to make a difference." Richard Nixon said, "There has never in history been an adequate black nation, and they are the only race of which this is true." That was Richard Nixon. This is Theodore Roosevelt, even though he invited Booker T. Washington to eat a meal at the White House. He had something else to say in a letter he wrote to Owen Wister in 1901. He said, "I entirely agree with you that as a race and in the mass, African Americans are altogether inferior to the whites." He also said, "I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indians are dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are." That was Theodore Roosevelt. These are presidents, by the way. This is Warren Harding. He said in 1921 at a speech in Birmingham, he advocated for political equity for African Americans, but he also supported segregation. He said, "I want to see the time when black men will regard themselves as full participants in the benefits and duties of American citizenship. But whether they like it or not, amalgamation of the races is not going to be tolerated." That was in 1921. He was not a president. I believe he was a candidate running. This was George Wallace, governor of Alabama in 1963. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. I'm sure everybody remember that one. Theodore Bilbo, a senator from Mississippi, said, "Every man and woman who favors white supremacy and Negro segregation and who believes in preserving the purity of the race should join the white supremacy poll tax club today." Strom Thurmond, U.S. Senator from South Carolina. This is the state where Nikki Haley is. 1948, he was running for president, and he said, "All the laws of Washington and all the bayonets of the army cannot force the Negro into our homes, our schools, our churches." That was in 1948. Bill Tillman, U.S. Senator from South Carolina, said, "We have done our level best to prevent blacks from voting. We have scratched our heads to find out how we could eliminate the last one of them. We stuffed ballot boxes, we shot them. We are not ashamed of it." He was the senator from 1895 to 1918, senator of South Carolina. This is now Lexter Maddox. This is the governor of Georgia. He said, "I am trying to maintain segregation in this restaurant, and I'm going to do it." Now, what was happening in Georgia, they were trying to stage a protest, and he wielded an axe to prevent African Americans from entering the restaurant. And while doing so, he said, "I'm trying to maintain segregation in this restaurant, and I'm going to do it." Bull Connor, we know who Bull Connor is, right? That's the guy from Bloody Sunday. He said, "You can never whip these birds if you don't keep you and them separate. I found that out in Birmingham. You've got to keep your white and black separate." That's not the words he said. Orville Faubus. This is the governor of Arkansas, and he was the one that called the National Guard out to prevent African Americans from entering school in 1957. That was of the Little Rock Central High, the Little Rock 9. He said, blood will run in the streets if Negro pupils should attempt to enter Central High School. That's what he said in 1957. There's more. Jesse Helms, U.S. Senator from North Carolina, he said, the Negro cannot count forever on the kind of restraint that's thus far left him free to clog the streets, disrupt traffic, and interfere with other men's rights. Ross Burnett, governor of Mississippi, 1962. There was a crisis at the University of Mississippi. Barnett said, there is no case in history where the Caucasian race has survived social integration. We will not drink from the cup of genocide. Barnett is the one that opposed James Meredith from enrolling in the University of Mississippi. Eisenhower, at a White House dinner, I think this was before Brown v. Board, but he said to Chief Justice Earl Warren of the Supreme Court, Dwight Eisenhower, the 34th president, said, their little sweet girls are not required to sit in school alongside some big black buck. When he's saying they, he's talking about white Southerners. He told Chief Justice Earl that he understood why white Southerners wanted to make sure their sweet little girls are not required to sit in school alongside some big black buck. Yes, he said that. So Woodrow Wilson, that's the president who played the racist film Birth of a Nation. He segregated the federal workforce after it had been integrated for decades. So he came in and segregated. We know Andrew Jackson, he was known for the Indian Removal Act, which led to the Trail of Tears, killing off a bunch of Native Americans. Andrew Jackson was also racist, but there is no but. Andrew Jackson was always racist. He sought out the help of the black militia during the War of 1812. I believe that was the right one, the War of 1812. He said he couldn't rely on the white soldiers. They were too weak. So he set out to get the black militia that was successful in all other wars. He utilized them to win the War of 1812. Yeah, racist and all. He knew it. This is just some of the proof that America is, quote unquote, not a racist country or never been a racist country. Oh, wait a minute. There's one that I forgot because they called him the Great Emancipator. The Great Emancipator. What's his name? Man, one who was assassinated. Lincoln. That's him. Yeah, they call him the Great Emancipator, but this is what he had to say about black people. Here it is, the Great Emancipator. He said, I am not, nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. Yeah, so that was Abraham Lincoln's direct quote on racism. That was Abraham Lincoln racist quote. And there has been several presidents who have made racist remarks. They've campaigned on racism. There's a lot more. I just shaved it down to like under 30. That could have been about maybe 25 quotes from different elected officials. So all of those that I said were elected officials, meaning they had power and control over what the laws were in the country, right? So that's the biggest thing. Can they be racist and just be in their racism, or can they be racist and also make my life a living hell with their racism? What can they do to me because of their racism? Well, if they're an elected official, they can enact racist policies that will directly affect you. So here's a few. Slavery, of course. It just didn't stop at slavery, but let's just, at a minimum, let's say slavery. During enslavement and also after enslavement, there were several laws that were passed aside from black codes, because there were black codes that were passed right after the Civil War, but there were laws that were passed specifically against black people having the right to bear arms. Mind you, the Constitution is already in place, right? So the right to bear arms is the Second Amendment. That should apply to citizens, right? Well, there were a series of laws in different states. I believe South Carolina was one, that passed laws prohibiting black people from bearing arms. Yeah, only black people. Was not whites or none of that. It was just only blacks. Now, another series of laws, black codes. This was in 1865 to 1866. These laws were passed in southern states to restrict freedom of African Americans and their ability as a cheap labor force after slavery was abolished. So here's an example. No Negro should be allowed to pass within the limits of the town, whatever town it is, without special permission from his employer. They also put in a vagrancy laws. That's basically if you was black and you didn't have a job, that was against the law. So you were now in the prison industrial complex if you didn't have a job right after slavery. The other thing they did with those laws was they put black people after slavery. They put black people into sort of like employment contracts, but the employment contracts, it wasn't in the best interest of the black person. It was in the best interest of the white person. It basically said that the only way you can get a job, they also had them like bright contracts where they had to work for these people for 12-month contracts or whatever. They did that. Then they also put in laws that say you can't quit your job and go to another job unless the employer that you currently work with approves it, right? If I have a job and this job is paying me, $5 an hour. Of course, we know that's not the case back then, but let's say this job is paying $5 an hour. Well, if someone else offers me $10 an hour to do the same job, it's within my right to go to the other employer that wants to pay me more. Well, yeah, they put in laws to stop black people from doing it. Those were a part of the black codes. And Nikki Haley assertion that today is a lot better than it was. Yeah, it could be the case if her party, the GOP, wasn't so hell-bent on turning back the clock on racial progress. They only want to touch anything that's dealing with race. They're not talking about policies about people being able to earn better wages, people having basic needs. If you listen to anyone in that party, all people in that party, the only thing that they are talking about is race. I'm going to be more racist than you. That's what their battle is about. Who can be the most racist? That's it. If you've looked at some of those debates, the Republican debates right now, they're not talking about policies unless the policies are dealing with race. And it's not policies that benefit race. It's policies that cripple one race specifically, and that's black people. No, not people of color. It's black people. And I'm saying black people because if you appear black, then it applies to you. So yeah, we know brown, we have the black and brown thing, but some of those brown people don't appear black. There's a lot of them that do, but a lot of them don't. The ones that don't, they are like the Nikki Haley, because the Nikki Haley would be considered a brown person. She actually said she was a little brown girl, yet right now she won't even use her real name. Her real name is Nitra, and Haley is her married name. So she just went to Nikki and took the white last name. You probably wouldn't even know her parents if you saw them. You had slavery, you had black codes. You had Jim Crow law. Jim Crow laws, of course, they enforced racial segregation in the South. This is an example of one of the Jim Crow laws. All railway companies carrying passengers in their coaches in this state shall provide equal but separate accommodations for the white and colored races. Redlining. This is a practice by which banks and insurance companies refuse or limited loans, mortgages, and insurance within specific geographic areas, especially inner city neighborhoods, basically what a black people was. Here's an example of a policy. The Homeowners Loan Corporation. They made a residential security map that was marking minority neighborhoods in red to indicate a higher risk for loan issue. Voting restrictions. This was, of course, after the Civil War, even up until now. Various laws and practices, including literacy tests. I talked about that before. Remember, they put in literacy tests and found out the cousins couldn't fucking read. Grandfather clauses. That was designed to disenfranchise African Americans because they realized that they cousins and shit couldn't read, so they put in a grandfather clause, which basically means if your grandfather was able to vote, then you can vote, and you don't have to take this literacy test. Here's an example of the text within the policy. No person shall vote who do not pass a literacy test. Segregation in the military. That was from 1775 to 1948. African Americans served in segregated units and were often given menial or non-combat role. President Truman signed the bill in 1948. 1970s, war on drugs. Policies that disproportionately targeted African American communities for drug-related offenses. This was the Anti-Drug Abuse Act in 1986. It created disparities in sentencing for crack versus powdered cocaine. School segregation, despite Brown versus Board of Education decision 1954. Many schools remained segregated or resegregated over time. The policy stated separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. That was from the Brown versus Board of Education decision. We know Brown v. Board, many schools remain segregated or resegregated. Right now, we are considered de facto segregated because they use zip codes and then they also put people in certain areas. There's still segregation. There's just no legal law for it. Now they segregate people by zip code. So mass incarceration was one. That was 1970s till present. This disproportionately incarcerated African Americans due to policies like mandatory sentences and three-strike laws. The Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 94, that's the crime bill, contributed to the rise in mass incarceration. And then the last one is housing discrimination. This is after the Civil War until present. This is actually, what's her name? Nitra was a victim of housing discrimination. Discriminatory policies in selling or renting housing, including steering, blockbusting, and restrictive covenants. Here's some of the policy. A restrictive covenant policy. No part of said property hereby conveyed shall ever be used or occupied by any Hebrew or by any person of the Ethiopian, Malay, or Asiatic race. That was a restrictive covenant. It included black too. Bottom line is, both of them is talking out the side of their ass. They trying to deny America's racism, but then they are perpetuating racism. With the policy. Like, their policies are racist. Banning of books, they're only banning black books. They're not banning white books. To Haley, DeSantis, and whoever else is trying to peddle this never racist fantasy, cut the shit. America's racial history is as real as it gets and never, ever has been, nor will it be changed by a political spin. America's racial history is real. It exists. And nothing y'all can say to try and make that go away. You can say it all you want, but denying it won't make it go away. Until then, shut the hell up. You're creating racist history right now as we speak. These are the people of the GOP, the Grand Old Party. This is still circling around about how America isn't racist. America is a racist country. America's never been a racist country. You can't say this country has never been racist, but we've made progress. Progress on what? If we made progress on race, then that means it exists, right? You can't make progress on something that don't exist. Like, what is it that we're making the progress on? It's something you all should be questioning when looking at these or listening to these political candidates, because it's not dog whistling anymore. They're just saying it out loud. They don't want you, okay? The GOP does not want you. The Republican Party does not want you. Donald Trump does not want you. They have effectively kicked black people out of the Republican Party since, I believe, the 60s. So it's foolish to even entertain any tiny bit of them as serious candidates for black people. I just went through the list of all the different racist comments that all of these different presidents and elected officials have said that was racist. What's added to that is that they were elected officials. So if you like racist people, then fine. Be with racist people. Do what you do. Go around racist people and all of that. But don't put racist people in elected positions that can enact policies that are racist towards you. You will essentially be putting yourself back into slavery. Yes, that can happen. Look at Louisiana, and I'm actually going to do an episode about that, about the black militia from Louisiana. You actually can be enslaved, freed, be emancipated, and then re-enslaved. It happened all the time. I mean, it happened so many times, even after the Civil War. And also that goes to the prison industrial complex and all of that. That's a lot, but just know that, yes, you can go backwards. So let's be real about what's going on in this political climate. People are getting more and more racist, and we just have to call it out. This is the Political Education for Freedom podcast, where we stomp out lies and revisionist history. I'm Nitra, reminding you to stay woke, stay critical, and keep fighting for the truth. Until next time, keep it real and keep it honest.